Our subject is Thomas Jefferson. In an age when politicians slide into television talk shows and become talk show hosts, planning their next political campaign, some hoping to run for president, a guy like Thomas Jefferson may seem a bit old-fashioned, but he was an amazing man, greatly misunderstood. I find conservatives and liberals both that have something, some kind of bone to pick with Thomas Jefferson for whatever reason. He was a true Renaissance man. He was an architect, a philosopher. He started the University of Virginia, an artist of sorts. He was born on April 13th, 1743. About this time, he'd be almost 267 years old. Greatly admired by people like Abraham Lincoln, who basically said as long as there was freedom on earth, Thomas Jefferson's philosophy would survive. Just imagine, though, if Thomas Jefferson would never have lived, we'd have lost probably our greatest philosopher in American history. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. You know, folks, every July 4th, we celebrate the writing of that particular document. That document has influenced many, many countries in the writing of their constitutions and other political documents. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is based on the Declaration of Independence by this Virginia man. In the Declaration of Independence, some radical ideas that Jefferson put forth. Today, they're radical ideas. He audaciously put forth the concept that government doesn't give rights to people, God does it. That all people are created equal, that we have certain absolute rights. And when the government doesn't listen to us and they repeatedly violate our rights, we can revolt against them and start a new government, the government that we like. One revolution wasn't enough for Thomas Jefferson. He wanted one every 20 years. This is what he wrote in a letter in 1787. God forbid we should ever be 20 years without such a rebellion. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. Jefferson was not an advocate of unnecessary violence toward government, but let me tell you, he was one heat-packing dude. He carried a gun when he went on walks. He encouraged other people to do it. And when it came time, he says, you need to take up arms. This is another letter he wrote. What country can preserve its liberties if the rulers are not warned from time to time that this people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. The Bill of Rights itself is in part a Jeffersonian victory. At a time when James Madison, who finally wrote the Bill of Rights, James Madison didn't agree that there needed to be a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. Most of the people who were the so-called framers didn't believe it. Jefferson was a great advocate of the Bill of Rights. He pushed and pushed James Madison. Finally, James Madison went over to his side and wrote a Bill of Rights. That's the reason, probably, a large part, we have a Bill of Rights today that protects our freedoms against unreasonable search and seizure, the right to freedom of speech. All the great rights that we have today is probably because of Thomas Jefferson. Another radical idea Jefferson had at his time, in which he was roundly criticized by the newspapers and religious organizations, he advocated the separation of church and state. Again, he's greatly misunderstood. Jefferson was not against religion. He didn't believe in removing religion from society. He promoted religion, even at the University of Virginia. What Jefferson was really talking about was checking the state. He didn't think the government should be dictating religion to us. He thought that it was the right of us, our churches, and even the state societies and state governments, they had a right to pick their own religions. Jefferson went even so far when he was President of the United States to translate the Bible from Greek, and he wrote his own version of the Bible, emphasizing the morals of Jesus to be used for teaching people basic ethics. Virtually until the day he died in his 80s, Jefferson advocated strong civil liberties positions. He was a radical. Shortly before he died, a week before he died, this is what he wrote. The mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately. Jefferson finally died on July 4th, 1826, some 50 years after he changed the world. And believe it or not, John Adams, one of his friends and sometimes political, not quite enemy, but they didn't get along sometimes, but they admired one another. And John Adams actually died the same day that Jefferson died, and it was the July 4th of the celebration. And his relatives were around the bed of John Adams. They said that John Adams said, basically, it's a good day. And then he went on to say, his last word, suppose it was, Thomas Jefferson survives. And he didn't know at the time, Adams, that Jefferson had just died a few hours before. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Jefferson survives. And there's some crazy currents going around this country trying to restrict Jefferson, and I find people saying he wasn't quite the guy that he should have been and all that. But let me tell you, if you study Thomas Jefferson, you're going to study a true American radical, someone who changed history.